I'd like to acknowledge that even though we are on the screens and connecting via virtually, basically, I acknowledge that we are on Aboriginal land, and I would like to acknowledge the elders, past, present, and future. I am in Melbourne, and I am basically on the land of the Kulin Nation. So mine is to say thank you, and it's an honor to be here. Oh, my tribal lifestyle was everything, everything. It was embedded in everything that we do. It's our DNA. Even though we were colonized by the British did occupy East Africa from the early 1800s, and Kenya gained its independence in 1963. And even after decolonization and gaining political independence and being exposed to this modern lifestyle, tradition still prevailed. The tribal lifestyle still prevailed in every way. And one of the things that I love about my childhood that I find very interesting is there were a number of layers that I had to peel off or to deal with and manage. The first layer was basically dealing with existing in a modern world, but still having a tribal heart set, DNA set, soul set. As I mentioned before, we're colonized by the British, and that meant I also grew up in the urban city. So like many Australians, we had access to a lot of the amenities that we have here. We had access and have access to education. The colonizers also brought the Christian religion. We also have statutory law. So that's just part of our modern DNA within Kenya. But at the same time, there was an expectation for us to continue living the tribal lifestyle. And what that looked like in my everyday life was, for example, I had to play gender-specific roles. The woman had to play a particular role, which was generally a domesticated role. You look after the family, you look after your household. And from a very young age, I was groomed to do that. For me as a young girl, understanding the nuances of the two cultures, because they're very different when it comes to customs, when it comes to practices, when it comes to language, food, and even appearance. They're very different. So I had to learn how to navigate between the two cultures, understand the nuances, adapt every time I move from one tribe to another, and also learn how to be effective in operating across the two, not only being successful in the one, but effective across the two. And that really taught me how to appreciate diversity. I understood from a very early age that people are different. I'm from different tribes and I'm from different cultures. I've got different influences. I appreciated that, understood that. And in that comes embracing. In that comes navigation and adaptability. The other thing that I came to learn was the existence of apartheid and understanding from an intellectual point of view, racial segregation, the discrimination of non-white citizens in South Africa, and learning that through high school and understanding the impact that it had on the community, and also watching the news. So as a young girl, that for me was something that I understood intellectually, but I've never experienced that racial discrimination until I came to Australia. And that was a massive wake-up call for me. I felt very prepared because I had the tribal influence. I knew how to live within a tribe. I knew how to be successful within the tribe and thrive. So in my mind, I felt prepared. And I made my way to Sydney. And in 1999, I remember getting off the plane, and I mentioned this to you when we had a chat. It was when I realized for the first time that I was Black. And for me, being a woman of color, a minority, has afforded me great opportunities to learn about other cultures. I think my experience of multiculturalism was here, like true multiculturalism, and being exposed and engaging with other cultures was in Australia. And also being able to expand my cross-cultural intelligence, building that capability and understanding how other tribes, and I call them tribes, I still use that reference because I think it's relevant, other people operate, how other religions, other groups operate, and I just got to learn and appreciate that. But the dark side for me was, first of all, joining. I remember signing up for a class where I got to understand the Australian history and understanding the white policy and the impact that the white policy had on the First Nations people. And I didn't understand how such a wealthy country and such a progressive country could have such a policy. And I didn't quite understand. I couldn't grasp it because it was something that I had read about while I was in Kenya, but it was around apartheid. I'd never been exposed to the white policy and the impact it has and had on the white First Nation people. And then also going through my own personal experience, experiencing racial discrimination and microaggression from comments like, "Oh, you must be very lucky to be in this country. Or you speak very good English. I mean, that's very good for someone like you." Or words like the N-word being used to refer to me. And the first time it happened, I was quite shocked, and it happened in a public place in Sydney. To people constantly asking you, "Where are you from? Where are you from? Where are you from?" and being reminded that you're not from here. So those experiences are experiences that I continue to experience today. It's not just something that was a one-off while I was in Wollongong, lived in Sydney. It's something that I continue to experience today in different ways and in different levels of intensity. It's something that I'm constantly challenged by. Initially, I was ill-equipped to deal with the discrimination. I didn't know how to. I wasn't taught. My parents had traveled overseas many times, and they'd experienced racism, but it was a visit and then they'd go back home. But the experience of living that racial discrimination and bias was something that I didn't really know how to deal with. I remember looking for help, asking for help, and the advice was just put your head down and just keep going, just brush it off. But there was an impact. And what I discovered over time was, because I felt rejected by others because of my racial identity, I started self-rejecting. And as a result, my coping mechanism at that time was to mask whatever I could of myself to avoid standing out even more. I just did not want any more negative attention. And I chose to do that in many ways. In the first 10 to 12 years of living in Australia, I chose to not use my voice. Even though when I was back in Kenya, I was very vocal. As a young girl, I was always very passionate about social equality, and I would stand up and fight for people. And in fact, I actually realized the other day that my parents actually had a nickname for me. They used to call me the human rights activist of the family. And I completely felt like I'd lost my voice when I came to Australia. I just could not stand up and fight for myself. So I masked my voice. I chose not to speak up. I chose not to shine the light on the issue. And I felt very disempowered for a very long time. I had a few masks in my toolkit, and that was like my survival toolkit for a very long time. And I had to drop the masks after a while. They stopped serving me. It became a huge burden when it came to my health and well-being. When it came to the workplace as well, it was a massive disservice. So for me, that was a big, big lesson. And now I choose to use my voice to advocate for diversity and inclusion. Absolutely. My lived experience from Kenya, obviously 41 years of lived experience for me, has really shaped who I am and what I do. As I mentioned before, I've always had a passion for social justice. And even looking at my school reports, the subjects that I did really well in were subjects to do with social ethics, and that's why I also chose psychology as well, and counseling when I came to Australia, and really did well in those subjects because of my passion for people. And so for me, that my upbringing and understanding the importance of tribe, inclusivity, when the tribe operated well, because as I mentioned before, we have issues of tribalism, but when the tribe operates well, it is the best thing. So understanding the inclusivity structures. I like the definition that our Diversity Council Australia provides. They use an identity-based definition. So they basically say that diversity is a differences that people have. And it could be informed by your social identity. So things like your caring responsibilities, your age, your cultural background, your sexual orientation, or professional identity. So it could be whatever you do for work. All of those identities influence how you see yourself and how you see others. But at the same time, those identities intersect. Those dimensions intersect in many ways. So, for example, for me, being a woman of color who's educated, who's from Kenya, who lives in Melbourne, St Kilda, who thinks in a particular way, who has Christian beliefs, all of those factors intersect. And that's where intersectionality comes in. It's a term that has been coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, and she was a Black feminist, and she looked at the issue around gender inequality in America in the 1980s. And she basically said it cannot be simplified to just all women are the same, one size fits all. Every woman has a different experience. And when she looked at the issue in close detail, she discovered that when certain points intersect certain dimensions, then those experiences are different. So for example, a woman of color who is gay will experience a different level of discrimination compared to a woman of color who is cisgender, or a white woman who is cisgender. So when you look at the intersectionality, it's really appreciating the complexity of humanity. And that's what I love about this work. And what I've discovered along the way in my 22 years in Australia is diversity has just been reduced to a single thread. It's what is visible. A lot of the times, it's what is visible to people. The risk that organizations face, and even communities, is actually reducing somebody's experiences to what they see. Gender, race, that's it. And that's the biggest risk. And that's what I've seen in a lot of organizations. People are not engaging with intersectionality. And as a result, there's so many people being left behind. When we talk about gender equality, gender progression, the women that benefit the most are the white women who are straight. When you look at other women, women of disability, for example, women of color, women from the LGBTQI community, they're starting from way behind. So that's my passion. That's my personal experience of intersectionality, living it, experiencing disadvantage, and understanding what that really means has really fueled that passion to help organizations see that, appreciate that, and prioritize that so that they can maximize on the power of inclusivity. The research is there. The business case is strong. There's an understanding that diversity and inclusion is just not nice to have. It is a business imperative, and it's also an ethical one, especially in the light of Black Lives Matter and Aboriginal Lives Matter. Also, as well as the Me Too movement, this actually has just blown open the lid and exposed systematic barriers that exist for women and people of color, for example. And there's a push now to be part of the solution. There's an expectation that the community has for organizations to step up and to be part of the solution. So there's an understanding, absolutely. Now, the level of commitment is what I see as something that varies from organization to organization. And when I say commitment, what I mean is just seeing the ones that are relatively young, new to the journey, who might not even have a diversity and inclusion strategy, not even a policy. For them, it's about getting people into the organization and getting this outcome, getting this commercial goal, and that's it. To organizations that are quite progressive and innovative. And I had the pleasure of working for one of them, Medibank Private, was quite progressive when it came to gender equality, for example, where there's a clear strategy, there were targets, there were accountability structures, there was a clear communication strategy, and also a support group, so employee resource groups to support the delivery of the strategy. So the commitment levels do vary, and it's evident when you look at how much and what the organization has chosen to invest in, whether it's measurement, whether it's human resources. And you can also look at the constitution of the workforce, and that's a good indicator of where the organization is at. I mean, when you step outside your door, you see people of all shapes and sizes. You see intersectionality come to play. It's your everyday, everyday experience. But when you go into many organizations, there's a monoculture. You don't see the same diverse representation and across all levels. So that's the work that I really want to do. I want to be part of the solution where people can have access to those opportunities, regardless of who they are, where they're from, that there's equality, there's equity, and there's inclusion. So leadership mindset is incredibly important. And that's where elders come in. So my culture, elders, the tribes are led by the older generation because of their expertise, because of their wealth of life experience. They're the custodians of tradition. And in my culture, elders are also, it's not about power or taking power. It's about taking responsibility and empowering people to do the same. So when we actually change the mindsets for a lot of the leaders who sit at the top, and so that they can actually take responsibility for diversity and inclusion, and then empower others by either maybe financial resourcing or human resourcing, that level of commitment, then you will start to see real change. But until then, leadership mindset If it's stuck where it is, that's a problem. But then there's also individual responsibility. That's something that is incredibly important. And that's something that I also really appreciate coming from the culture that I come from, where it's collectivist. It's not about individual agenda. It's about how is this going to help the tribe? How is this going to help the family? It's always about others and less about yourself. And with that, each person is encouraged to step up. You step up and you play your part to deliver that goal. Each person has a job to do. And I strongly believe that if we can also adopt that same attitude in the workplace, then we'll start seeing transformation. We get the leaders having a particular mindset, elders, I call them elders driving governance, attitude, and showing us how it's done. And then also mobilizing the commitment of their staff members so that individuals can step up and play their part for the collective good. Then that's when we'll actually start seeing real change in this space. The first thing is about prioritization. Diversity and inclusion is just not a nice to have. It's not something that you pop in and out of when you feel like. It needs to be embedded in the core business strategy. And for a lot of organizations, how they can make this better or how they can do better is making sure it's in everything that they do, from recruitment to promotion, to product design, to decision making. Every part of the business, diversity and inclusion needs to be embedded, needs to be weaved in. Otherwise, you end up having a single perspective, and that puts an organization at risk. So I believe that there's an opportunity there for many businesses to do that better. And to be intentional about it, I think that's really important. So imagine a world where you have a voice, you're able to share your experience with the employer, and they take that on board and create a diversity and inclusion strategy that is fit for purpose, that is relevant to their workplace, or with their staff members, and that is also reflective of the community, because the people that are designing, the people that are living and being impacted by these strategies also have to go back into the community. So it's not just work is here and community and family life is here. No, those things are there's actually no line. So there's an invisible line. So I think there's a responsibility that leaders and organizations have to ask their employees to share their lived experience and use that to shape the strategy, design, and implementation. And making sure people are held accountable.